But what I want you to take from this is to understand that I am being completely honest with you, and that geoengineering is occurring, it's been occurring, it is not new, and your tax dollars are funding this. I 100% know that the US Air Force was involved, and it kind of, I think back to all these things that I never had noticed. If you don't know what to look for, you can't look for something. And once I realized a process they were trying to hide, people have come out of the woodworks, from EPA compliance officers to ex-people that I worked with in my career field, who I cannot state for obvious reasons. I've had pilots come forward. I've had people come forward that actually load the canisters on the planes. These people don't come forward because they are afraid that they're going to end up like Snowden. And I continue to speak to let people know I've been screaming about this for 3 years and I'm still here. And why are you so afraid? Because many of these people are on active duty. And if you are willing to die for your country, supporting, the Constitution and defending us from enemies foreign and domestic, you are willing to die for your country, but now you're scared. You are scared and cowardly to talk about this. So I'm not just speaking to all of you in this room, I'm speaking to all those people that are gonna watch this online and watch it on YouTube. Because you can come forward, you can help expose this, and we can stop it. So many people wanna ask why? Why is this occurring? That's for later thought. From weather modification to weather weaponry, there's numerous reasons under Agenda 21 and tons of theories. But my job as an industrial hygienist is to make sure that I comply with the laws and enforce them. So it is unethical every day for all the other people that are out there that work in preventive health, or even physicians that aren't speaking about this. They need to. So one thing I want to tell you is what you can do about it. The biggest hurdle that we have is disinformation sites. I never say them, but I'm going to today, so that you know if anyone ever gives these to you as a reference to debunk you, it's Metabunk and Contrail Science. Those are two websites that are ran by a government shill named Mick West. And he is a computer gaming programmer who tries to tell you about persistent contrails. So somebody who isn't even credentialed in chemistry or physics or ecology, none of that, is trying to tell you that you're crazy. Okay? So also on social media, don't just hit the share button. There are links. You have to understand that I have met people who used to be purposeful disinformation trolls, as we call them. These people are paid to pretend that they're you, to get you on board to believe a website or an article, just so that you look so vulnerable. And then later it will be deemed non-credible, and then you look non-credible. So please vet, research. And if you have something to write with, I want you to take down my email. It is Kristen, Kristen, Megan, MEGHAN, @gmail.com. And by emailing me, I can give you some information for what I'm about to tell you. If you still don't believe it, or you still want to convince people, there's something you can do. You can take a glass jar. It needs to be a glass jar, so there's no BPAs. Take a rain sample and take a snow sample. I tried to discourage the soil sampling because everyone's background of where you live is different. Because a lot of the materials that are used in geoengineering are natural occurring in Earth, just not in the industrialized form that they're used. So if you take these rain samples and you take the snow samples, email me, because I cannot publicly tell you where to send them, because we've actually been blackballed by labs who refuse to run our samples. And a problem that is occurring is people are sending in rain samples to labs that don't realize how low the limit of detection needs to be, because these are nanoparticulates. They're very small. So if you email me, I can tell you where to send in your samples, and it's only around $50. That may be tough on some people, but it's way cheaper than maybe what you assumed. So I just want everyone to know and understand that of all things, of all the freedoms that we are losing, geoengineering is the #1 issue that we are facing. Because you can have guns and money and you can have everything. If you don't have food and water and you are dying of respiratory or neurological illnesses, what does it matter? So you've heard about vaccines, and you'll hear, about smart meters, and you'll hear about other issues like fracking. These are all systemic effects. We are getting overexposed to toxins. People will tell you fluoride's in the water, but it's not a lot. It is a lot because you're getting it everywhere in your food, water that you drink. Everything is washed with that water. And you're getting your vaccines. All this, it's a coupled systemic effect, and our bodies cannot metabolize these toxins.
So if I made a decision, or if there was a collective decision to do a geoengineering program, and you put, say, the kind of program I think makes more sense, we put about 1 million tons a year in, but let's say, you might end up killing many tens of thousands of people a year as a direct result of that decision. I made a decision, or if there was a collective decision to do a geoengineering program, and you put, say, the kind of program I think makes more sense, we put about 1 million tons a year in, but let's say, you might end up killing many tens of thousands of people a year as a direct result of that decision.
In 2018, scientists will take bold steps to explore a technology that could reverse the effects of climate change.
It's an engineering project that would literally touch every living thing on the planet.
They're looking at ways to reflect sunlight back into space and cool down the Earth. Geoengineering is the pioneering science that could well be on everyone's lips in 2018.
The idea of geoengineering is the idea that humans purposefully influence the climate of the planet. Solar geoengineering specifically is the idea of introducing a substance into the stratosphere that will cool down the planet by reflecting back sunlight.
If we turn down the sun a little bit, that brings the Earth's energy more into balance, and that could reduce some of the risks like extreme storms or extreme temperature. Exactly.
Okay, so what do we do?
So the other thing is horrifying. It is that you could actually spray sulfuric acid into the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up in a ugly tech fix.
You could spray something into the atmosphere to change. Okay.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
I made a decision, or if there was a collective decision to do a geoengineering program, and you put, say, the kind of program I think makes more sense, we put about 1 million tons a year in, but let's say, you might end up killing many tens of thousands of people a year as a direct result of that decision.
These are historical films of what can be done with a biplane, a small biplane that carries a very small payload. And that much can be done. How much more can a fully loaded military tanker, KC-10, KC-135, C-17 Globemaster, how much more material can they put in the air? About 500 times more with a single tanker. So consider how long this has been going on, and yet we have academia today telling us that this isn't happening. It's all in our mind, and that's all condensation. Do you think that's condensation? Absolutely not. And that's from a single biplane. This is from the 20s, by the way. Now, the next image coming up, how many have been told that the B-17 bombers of World War II leaving the trails is proof this is just condensation? When you see the next image, you'll see that that is absolutely provably false. That's a spray dispersion. And when you see, the military-industrial complex was more than willing to sacrifice bombers and bomber pilots to experiment with weather modification before the end of the war. And as you see that plane shutting off, we got this off the military archival footage. You cannot shut off condensation like that. That is not condensation. For all those who tried to convince us that these bombers were emitting condensation, the massive trails, that is absolutely false, and that proves it right there. It's important to know the data to refute those who would try to refute this issue, or whatever their interest, whatever their motive, whatever their fear. The proof is absolutely 100% on our side. Let's go back a little further. 1927, patent. That is what can cause an artificial cloud. It is not condensation. Let's look at the proof from this image. That is not condensation. That is a patented process of sprayed aerosols to create artificial cloud cover going back to 1927. And yet we have the geoengineering community telling us today that we don't have the technology for this. I debated an hour with academia's top gun denier, who represents MIT, Carnegie Science, Cornell, and Caltech. And he didn't fare well in that debate because the data is not on his side. But they would have us believe that we don't have the technology to do this. It was being done 90 years ago. This is a very important book cover. I have an original of this book from 1938. And from Admiral Byrd in the Arctic in 1938. Why did they have their illustrators design the cover in that manner? And they knew exactly what they were planning on doing in 1938. And there are many covert messages woven into many different forms of reports, materials, and so forth. But how telling is that? The grid pattern sky over Antarctica. And that's in fact where they started the climate engineering first. That's why the ozone layer disintegrated over Antarctica first. You can't put a particulate in the atmosphere without destroying ozone. And that's exactly what happened, and that's exactly what happened there first. But that's a very telling cover. Project Cirrus. When you see certain official sources claiming that the notion of modifying cyclones is just in the experimental stages, the discussion stages, absolute nonsense. This is 1947, 71 years ago, when hurricane suppression was started. And as they became aware that the public would never accept this for obvious reasons, they've tried to mask what is really unfolding. Collier's Magazine, 1952, Weather Made to Order. Initially, those in power did not have full control over all media as they do now. So we saw some reports leaking out, very telling articles. I have original copies of this magazine as well. But there was much more data initially. Weather as a weapon. This is from Popular Science, describing in 1958 that we had then the technology to control the weather and use it as a weapon. And again, for those who hear academia telling us this is all just a proposal, something we might need to do, absolutely false. Operation Popeye, 1968, indisputed weather warfare that caused massive precipitation over Vietnam to make it difficult for the Viet Cong to maneuver. And understand now, in our situation now, those in power control the spigot. They absolutely control the spigot. They decide where it rains, how much it will rain, how toxic that rain will be. Is that not literally control over life itself at that point, as President Johnson emphatically said at the beginning of this presentation?
Another example
Head of the CIA, John Brennan.
Often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly. As promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would also raise a number of challenges for our government and for the international community. On the technical side, greenhouse gas emission reductions would still have to accompany SAI to address other climate change effects, such as ocean acidification, because SAI alone would not remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain regions of the world at the expense of other regions could trigger sharp opposition by some nations. Others might seize on SAI's benefits and back away from their commitment to carbon dioxide reductions. And as with other breakthrough technologies, global norms and standards are lacking to guide the deployment and implementation of SAI and other geoengineering initiatives.
Does anyone in this room think that our government or any other government regarding their citizens would ask our permission first? Does anybody really think that? And you heard Mr. Brennan say that it would benefit some countries at the expense of others, making those other countries what would be scientifically termed a climate sacrifice zone. And who has the ability to decide who is sacrificed? The country with the military that's bigger than the next 10 militaries combined. But it's not just countries that are being sacrificed. We here in California and the west coast of the US must be at minimum considered a climate sacrifice zone.